Good morning, everybody. Because we have persons who are English speaking in the room, I will use the English language for my presentation. I hope that's okay with everybody. My name is Ciprian Jichici. I'm the general manager of Genisoft, also chief architect of high-tech systems and software. I'm also participating in the Microsoft Regional Directors Program, which is a sort of a more special program of Microsoft that unites about 100 of the best independent Microsoft platform experts from the world. Today we're gonna cover a very interesting subject. It's also a very hot subject, a very hot topic. Not only it's about mobile development, but also it's about cross-platform mobile development. And before actually entering into the details of my presentation, I just want to remind you that because we're speaking about mobile, right? Today we're gonna do the draw for our excellent prize, the Microsoft Surface Pro 3. So please don't forget to pass by our booth downstairs to take a look at what we have there and register for the contest. If my memory serves well, we'll do the draw at 6 o'clock p.m. So I wish you all the luck to win our Surface Pro 3. Now, before entering into the technical discussion, I just want to pause for a few minutes to highlight some of the things that were announced last evening. I don't know how many of you had the chance to watch the Connect event keynotes. Just a quick draw of hands. Who did watch the, well, a few hands then. I think it's as big as some of the milestones in Microsoft's history. Last evening's announcement was about, especially about ASP.NET and the .NET framework. And to be very honest, if someone would have told me 5 years ago that this is going to happen in 2014, I would have my serious doubts about this. Namely, Microsoft announced last evening that the entire .NET is going open source, as well as the fact that the .NET framework is going to be available cross-platform. I think that's a huge announcement on terms of Microsoft, and not only it is a huge announcement, but in the same time shows that we're really dealing here with a fundamentally new Microsoft. That's a totally different Microsoft from the company that was having troubles publishing even its networking protocols or things like that, which we all know happened in the past. This means an enormous boost for .NET programmers. It means an enormous boost for the .NET framework. Why am I repeating this announcement? Because it also means a lot for mobile development. Actually, one of the co-hosts of the keynotes last evening was Miguel de Icaza, who is the father of Mono. Mono, we all know, was traditionally the open source Linux-based fork of the .NET framework, right? Now, Mono and the new open source .NET framework, of course, will merge in the following months so that we will have one .NET framework that runs on all platforms and implicitly, eventually, that runs on all devices. This is really, really big. The other big announcement was about Visual Studio 2015. Visual Studio 2015 is gonna bring the level of tooling for development to a whole new level, especially for mobile development. I'm going to talk about and I'm going to show you today some of the things that are available right now with Visual Studio 2013 Update 3, but be prepared to see a whole lot of improvements in Visual Studio 2015. Visual Studio 2015 is readily downloadable as we speak, so you can download it, you can play with it. It's up there available. And finally, and that's the funny one, well, funny, of course, in a matter of speaking, I would never have expected the .NET framework to become a NuGet package. Well, guess what? The .NET framework will be a NuGet package, and the immediate implication of this is that every single application can have its own version of .NET Framework. This, at least for us at Genisoft and HTSS, it has been a huge blocker because there were many, many cases where we would have liked to upgrade the .NET Framework for a certain application, for a certain platform of our customer, but we were held back by the potential implications for other apps running on the same machines, right? Now, because you have it in process, in application, you can have as many versions and as many variants of .NET Framework as your application require. So that's really, really huge. I encourage you to watch the recorded keynotes from last evening's event. It is a huge milestone for Microsoft, and I have to be honest with you, I'm really proud that I haven't stopped betting on Microsoft because, at least from my point of view, Microsoft is cool again. They lost their coolness for quite a number of years, right? And I think it's the first time in many, many years when I feel that it's really, really cool to be a Microsoft developer again. So having said that, let's enter into the agenda of today's discussion. I'm gonna make a brief case for cross-platform development. We're gonna talk a little bit about why should we even care about cross-platform development and why is it important for us. And then we're gonna delve into the available options that we have today. I'm gonna talk about cross-platform development within the Windows ecosystem. And then I'm going to talk about cross-platform development outside of the Windows ecosystem, meaning targeting the other platforms, of course, the most important ones being Android and iOS. And finally, I promise you that today we're gonna stop for some Q&A. I'm gonna be more accurate with the timing of my presentation. So, okay. Why cross-platform? We've been through very interesting phases in the past, let's say, 5 to 6 years, right? We're starting from a world where mobile devices meant Windows Mobile. Does anyone remember Windows Mobile? Okay. 3 hands, 4 hands, 5, 6. Okay. So people still remember it, right? Let's be honest. It was a mess, right? It was the dominant operating system in the mobile platform, but it was a mess. Phase 2, or let's say the first phase after this moment, was iOS, right? The iPhone took the industry by storm. At some point, everybody was dreaming, wanting, buying an iPhone. So iOS became the top dog in the mobile era, right? Then we reached the next phase when a small little thing called Android took the industry by storm. So today we're in a situation where in many parts of the world, in terms of platform reach, Android is the top dog, at least in terms of numbers of devices running Android. So the reality of today is that we're stuck in a 3 participants race. 2 of them are quite well ahead, I mean Android and iOS. But the third one has consolidated in the past 2 years its position as the third player, I mean, of course, Windows Phone. So why cross-platform after all? It's quite obvious today, and I have been talking in the past, I think 3 years, with many, many of our customers about what is the right way to do when you want to implement a mobile app. And at some point there were lots of opinions. When iOS was top dog, people were like, well, that's it. We're going to just learn Objective-C. And we're going to do our development in Xcode with Objective-C. And we're going to do it like iOS imposes it, right? And then when Android became top dog, people were like, hey, we already know Java, right? So, of course, we're going to do our development in Java, so that's it. The truth is, today, it's quite hard to make a business case for the most part of the mobile apps to do native platform-linked development. So I think that cross-platform development today is the #1 choice for any company that thinks about or actually has plans about doing mobile apps. What is the advantage of cross-platform? Of course, it's less code. We're going to talk a little bit more later about less code, because it's also a little bit of a trap, right? I've heard speakers who are preaching cross-platform development and telling folks that, you know, if you do it like this, or with this framework, or with that framework, you'll only need to write your code once. We're not really there yet. But cross-platform development means less code. That's sort of an obvious. The other one is, the other advantage is lowering the barrier of entry. It's quite hard today, if you are not in the mobile space, to enter the mobile space. Because you think like, hey, I'm a company, I want to do an application, right? It means I have to hire a team of Object-C developers. Then I have to hire a team of Java developers. Then I have to hire a team of C# developers, right? All of this for the same app. So it's kind of a blocker for many, many companies when they see it like this. So naturally, cross-platform comes into the focus, right? And finally, but equally important, it is about maintenance. We all know that in a software project, no matter what is the platform, no matter what is the framework we use, there is about 15 to 20% of the entire cost in design, development, and implementation, and it's about 80%, or the rest up to 100%, in maintenance over time. And that's equally important. And any large company that seeks to implement a mobile app will think really, really hard about the long-term costs. And the long-term costs, of course, are about maintenance. So I'm going to cover 2 scenarios today, as I've mentioned. I'm going to cover the Windows environment scenario. And here we're going to talk about universal apps. That is a relatively new approach that Microsoft proposes for unifying development on Windows and Windows Phone. You all know that Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1, they share about 85% of the kernel. So they're basically the same operating system. With Windows 10, it's going to be the same operating system. There's going to be only one operating system. Having said that, it's equally true that the user experience on a larger device, like a tablet, or like a large screen desktop, or an Xbox, right? Compared to the user experience on a phone or on a small device, and when I say small device, I might even think about these kinds of devices, right? This is the new Microsoft Band. This is the smallest device in the family. It's going to be radically different. So the unified apps approach proposes a way to do things that helps us not only use the same code base, but also to reduce the effort in adapting to the different screen sizes. The other important scenario I'm going to discuss about is the all environment scenario. And here we do have what becomes a classical debate in the industry, right? It's HTML versus native, right? This is one of those debates that I really like in our industry. And we've had a lot of them over the time, right? Remember the open source versus closed source debate, right? Remember the SQL Server versus Oracle debate, and so on and so on. And these debates tend to become sort of religious, right? You have these zealots on every side who are saying, no way, the way we do it is the best. The other ones is like, they are stupid, right? They don't know nothing. Only our way is the right way, right? So we're going to talk about some pros and cons, and we're going to see the approaches for both of them. But you know, when reality kicks in, you always find out that neither one nor the other are the obvious single and right choices. The truth is always somewhere in the middle. And there are going to be folks who will do it one way, and other folks will do it the other way. So we're going to discuss about it. Now, let's get into some of the details here, because the details get really, really interesting, right? Now, let me say it from the very beginning that I really don't favor either of them, because I and my teams at Genisoft and HTSS, we've been already working for quite a number of years in this space. We've done it both ways. We've been happy and miserable both ways, right? Eventually it's a matter of choice. The one thing though that I, again, like about our industry is never-ending stories. I think HTML is one of them, right? Since HTML1, we've been told that this is the moment where everything will be unified, right? This is the only one technology that will be truly cross-platform. You write it once, runs everywhere, right? Until Microsoft decides to do something different in Internet Explorer. And Google decides to do something different in Chrome. And Firefox decides to do something different in their browser. And Apple decides to do something different in Safari. And that's the end of it, right? And then we've had HTML2, which was really not a public standard, right? HTML3, 4. Now the buzzword is HTML5. Now HTML5 is the ultimate promise, right? And there's some truth to this, to be very honest. The truth is at the moment, it's probably, from the point of view of standards, it's probably the most advanced initiative in the industry. And that's really important. Because big players now understand the importance of playing by the standards. And that's good. Today, the state of the art is HTML5, CSS3, of course, and JavaScript. The other important pro for HTML approach is that it is accessible, right? There are a lot of folks who know HTML. There are even more who think they know HTML, right? But that's another matter, right? There are a lot of folks who really know HTML and know it well. So that's an important pro. The cons, though, are that sometimes, in certain cases, it's really difficult to achieve native look and feel. Haven't you had sometimes this feeling that I was downloading an app on iOS, it really didn't feel like an iOS app, right? Because there are some very specific design approaches in iOS that make an app feel like an iOS app. The position of the buttons, the way they behave, the way which we navigate through the different screens, and so forth. Same place for Android. And turns out that folks using, or Windows Phone for that matter, folks using a certain type of platform are used to do things in a certain way, right? I'm really pissed when my back button doesn't work in Android as I expect it to work, right? Or when I have an app on Android that on the top right corner has a back button. Have you seen that? I've seen it quite a lot, right? So you have to be very careful with this one. The other con is it's really still fragmented. Some things just don't work on every platform, right? Think about the CSS quirks, right? You do have to sometime write platform-specific CSS. That's how life it is. That's how life is right now, okay? Plus, when we talk about mobile apps, HTML-based apps still miss some of the services of the platform. Some of the operating system's APIs are simply not accessible or are not fully accessible. So we've got good things, and we've got some not so good things. In terms of the native approach, of course, the number one pros is performance. Native apps are as fast as they get on their respective platforms. That's sort of obvious, right? The other one is, of course, they have full access to the OS. Meaning full access, I mean they can access all the APIs that are exposed by the OS. So there's no limit from this point of view. And finally, the third one is they do have native look and feel. With an important side note here. You can still screw a UX even if you develop native, right? So there's no limit in failure. We all know that, right? But the difficulty to achieve native look and feel is much lower with native apps. However, the big cons there is the development costs. When you want to do cross-platform and you choose the native path, it means you will have an Objective-C team, you will have a Java team, and you will have a C# team. So that's not really very, very easy. But to be very honest, we've had customers who are willing to invest this way. Their mobile strategy is so important for them that they are willing to pay the extra money. So I'm not here to say that we need to rule out that option. By no means. But what we have to understand is that it is a costly option. Or at least it's more costly than the other ones. So let's move a little bit further. There is another interesting choice, because I was mentioning Miguel, the Icasa, and Mono. There is what we call the native cross-platform approach. And there's this company called Xamarin, who is just, it is one of the most spectacular American companies in the last 3 years. They started 3 years ago with a developer base of around 10,000 developers. At this year's Xamarin Evolve conference, they just announced that they reached 750,000 developers. And mind you that the business license for developing using the Xamarin tools is only $999. So there must be some value there if this insane amount of developers is using that technology. And what's there is what's in the title. It's native, and in the same time is cross-platform. Their technology is based on Mono, and this morning when I was reviewing my notes, I just edited a little bit my slides, right? It's not here yet, it's not true yet, but it will be in the coming months. That's no doubt about it. The other one is that you develop in C#, obviously. And the third one is you also do get a cross-platform user experience engine. That was just released this year. It's called Xamarin Forms. And it's XAML-based. Well, what a surprise. So what are the choices that we have available in Visual Studio? And when I say Visual Studio, I say Visual Studio 2013 Update 3. So you have to have at least this version in order to have all these versions available. The first one is Universal Apps. The other one is, I never stop sort of wondering about the unlimited ideas that get out of Microsoft marketing. They decided to call it multi-device hybrid apps. In essence, it's actually Cordova, right? It's Apache Cordova. The third one is Xamarin Apps, either regular ones or Xamarin Forms. So let's start with the first one. How do we do development inside or within the Windows ecosystem? And we have two choices here. We can create universal apps, either XAML-based or HTML-based. And there's an interesting concept here that Microsoft has introduced, the concept of shared projects. But let's not talk about it, and I will rather show it to you how it works. So let me start the first demo of the day. And let's create a very simple universal application, just to take a look at how this works. So in the templates, in the Visual Studio templates, as you can see here in the store apps, we have one type of app, the universal app, and there are some blank templates and the hub, the type app, and also we can do the class libraries. Let me pause a moment to talk a little bit about the portable class libraries. Microsoft introduced in .NET Framework introduced the concept of portable class libraries. There are some folks who call them pickles, right? The PCLs. And this concept is about writing code that can run on any platform, .NET code that can run on any platform. Meaning that a pickle is usually a library that does not use any type of dependencies on the operating system it runs on. So there are some limitations imposed by Visual Studio on what we can have and what we cannot have in a portable class library. The other one that we have here is with HTML, and with store apps, you can have universal apps based on JavaScript. And let's start with such a universal app, just to have a glimpse on how this works. I'm not going to show functionality in the app because that's not my focus today, but I'm going to focus more on how it works. So let's take a look to the structure of the solution. As you can see, our solution has 3 projects. There's a Windows project, which is intended to run on the Windows operating system, the Windows runtime, tablet or desktop, and there is Windows Phone. Both of them are 8.1. And there is a project called app2.shared. This is the type of project I was mentioning. This is the project that contains shared code. And this is the project where we will implement most of the functionality of our apps. Basically, app2.windows and app2.windows phone are only some shims around the shared code that enable us mostly to build and package our apps for their respective environments. And all the fun is in the shared app. So let's take a little look at this particular type of shared app. And as you can see, what we do have here is app.xaml. App.xaml, as you probably know, I'm sorry, I've reset my environment and I forgot to set the fonts. Please bear with me just one moment. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, good. So, as you can see, this is the typical app.xaml, a typical entry point that we have in Windows applications. And we also have some code behind here that basically enables us to hook into the diagnostics and to initialize the application. And as you can see, it creates the root frame. And most interestingly, though, is you already have out of the box some platform-specific approaches. So what is important to understand is I'm not telling you here that you will write one code base and it will run on both without any changes. There's still going to be some places where you need to do some adjustments. But as time goes by, these places will become fewer and fewer, and the effort to do it for both platforms is gonna be, of course, less and less. Now, let's take a look into the applications themselves. And as you can see here, we have the main page of the Windows app. Of course, this is a trivial app. It only displays background, and we have also the main page of our Windows Phone app, which again displays in XAML this approach. So let's take a look on these apps and see how they run. As you can see now, I'm building my app, and it's gonna run. It starts, it behaves like a normal application. There's really not much to see about it, but it behaves like any normal Windows application. Now, if I start my Windows Phone application, it's gonna take a while it loads. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention. What we get with Visual Studio 2015 is also an integrated Android emulator. one of the things that I really, really hate about developing on Android is the native Google emulator. I think it's the worst emulator I've ever seen. It's slow, it's buggy, and if you want to do some stuff with OpenGL, you're dead in the water. We've been using the new Android emulator for Xamarin for quite a while, but I'm really happy that now in Visual Studio we're going to have a native Android emulator. Yeah, there are some other options too. That's true. Sorry? That's a good question. And since you popped up the question, let's talk a little bit about that one. Yeah, that's the first thing that's interesting when you start developing for iOS. So you have all this stuff in Visual Studio, right? Or in whatever other environment. So you have your development machine. You either use Cordova or you use Xamarin. You do everything in Visual Studio except for build and debug. And for that, of course, you need a Mac machine, accessible on the same network, right? So it's not a technical limitation, to be frank and very honest. It's a licensing limitation. Apple imposes this limitation. So what do? You either, yes, please. Thank you. No, it's like somebody was like with a hand like this, and I say, oh, that must be a question. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, we'll have to ask the Xamarin folks. but let me tell you one thing. I bet it will change. Okay? Yes, please. No. No, because it's still a licensing issue, right? Even more than that, you can't have the Mac OS in a virtual machine. It has to be a physical machine, right? So, believe it or not, right? And, right, this is me. This is some stuff that I'm carrying with me. Okay? So, because that's life, you know? That's what we need to do. So, you need to have that. At least today, this is how it works. I really doubt that Apple will sort of change this unless their market share drops significantly, which again, I don't think. But, well, so that's the story about, unfortunately, about Apple. But you know what? When you start doing productive things with this, you start being pissed off about this because you need to make sure that your Xamarin frameworks are in sync. You can't have one version of Xamarin on the Mac machine and one version of Xamarin on your Visual Studio machine, right? Well, the fun thing is that Xamarin also brings Xamarin Studio, which is a development environment that runs on both Windows and Mac. So you can do all your cross-platform development on the Mac, right? But for some reasons, we really don't do that. And I just don't want to get into the details, okay? So let's get back to our app. As you can see, the emulator has started. Not much to see about it, of course, as I mentioned, but that's how we approach. Now, I want to show you a little bit the shared project because this is really the interesting one. Let's take a look into it. And as you can see, the structure of the proj file is really different from a standard Visual Studio C# project. Because actually what it imports here are some of the extensions for the build tools that are defined for shared projects. Actually, if I take a look at my configuration manager here, as you can see, the shared project doesn't even appear here. And there's a good reason for that. It does not build, right? What happens is when my platform-specific project builds, the content of the shared project is incorporated into that project, okay? It's sort of what we used to do with linking files when you have a source control infrastructure for your project. Before shared project, that's what at least we did. When we wanted to share source code, we linked files into different projects from the same place. So let me get back to my slides now. This is just a short glimpse on how do universal apps look. I encourage you to take a look at them and to see how they work. The second major topic of today, of course, is Cordova. Cordova is backed by Apache Foundation. It used to be called PhoneGap, right? Now the name that has sort of stuck in the industry is Apache Cordova. Apache Cordova is actually a way of writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript apps that run cross-platform. It is fully open source. It is backed by Apache Foundation, as I mentioned, and it is also backed by Microsoft. Microsoft is investing right now a significant amount of effort in supporting Apache Cordova in Microsoft's development environment, which is, of course, Visual Studio. So, what do we need for a Cordova app? Don't you love these things, right? For folks who are born in the Visual Studio C# world, I mean for developers, right? Having to set up a build path or setting up an environment variable or stuff like that, this is just foreign language, right? For somebody who comes from the Linux world, this is natural, okay? So let's take a look. What do we need for Apache Cordova? We need Node.js. Everybody knows Node.js? Who's using Node.js? Okay, right? If somebody would have told me 10 years ago that I will have server-side functionality written in JavaScript, I would have said like, what? Right? Good for you. Well, TypeScript is actually not the language, right? Well, that's another debate. That's another debate, okay? But from my side, I freaking hate JavaScript. Because it's no typing in there, okay? And for that, TypeScript, yes. TypeScript is one of the big things that Microsoft has innovated in this space. Of course, it's no surprise that the father of TypeScript is actually the very same person as the father of C#, which is Anders Hejlsberg from Microsoft. So Node.js, Google Chrome. And we'll see in a moment why. Because that's really, really interesting. The other one is Git, of course. The other one is Ant, of course, right? Because in this world, every single task has a different tool and a different framework, right? Java, Android SDK, Apple iTunes, of course, right? iTunes, why? For when you publish your app, right? To be very clear, today we're talking about developing apps. I think I could use about 2 or 3 sessions to talk about packaging and publishing apps, okay? That's a whole different ballgame, a whole different one. And of course, if you want to do databases, you have SQLite. If you want to do communication, you have WebSockets. And you need to configure and to do all of this. So, fortunately, the Visual Studio plugin for Apache Cordova does all of this for you. Okay? So let's take a look at it. Let me open a solution that I have prepared, which uses Apache Cordova. Blank Cordova app 1. So as you can see, the structure of the solution is fairly simple. It actually contains only one app, and this is the Cordova app. The entry point of this is, of course, index.html. And index.html just shows that a simple message. It says, hey, our app is ready. We're ready to go. That's fine. So let's start. Now, let's actually start this app. And please take a look here. I'm in an Android scenario, so I want to run it in Android. But when I take a look at the environment when I want to run it, I have this little thing called Ripple, right? Ripple is so cool. That's one of the reasons why we need Chrome for Cordova. And I will show you in a moment why is Ripple cool. Because actually Ripple is an HTML emulator, right? Oops. My application does not appear to match the platform as I selected. I think I'll need to recompile my app. Sorry for that. Let me just clean the solution. Good. And run it again. So, as I've mentioned, Ripple is an HTML emulator. And what I can do with Ripple is I can take a look at my app and do all sorts of things in terms of emulating it. I have all sorts of settings available. I have all sorts of device settings available. It's, in a word, it's an emulator which is based on HTML. So this is really cool for prototyping my apps, starting to work with my apps, starting to do all things to my apps. In fact, let's just do a simple, I've prepared here some little quirks that will just get us started to see some of the things that we can do. The first one is, let's change this, okay? So I want a red app, okay? I don't like blank white apps. So here's my red app, right? That's something that I did change, of course, using only the style. And this is, basically this is HTML development, right? The other thing that I want to do is I want to show you a little bit about the debugging capabilities. So for that, let me just add very quickly here a little button, and then I would like to add some stuff here. And by the way, I'm using TypeScript myself. Okay, so index TypeScript is the one that I want to use. I'm just gonna do some things here, and as you can see, I'm doing this button. I'm attaching an event handler, and I'm just changing the color to green in that event handler. So I don't do too much. Take a look here. When I say document, I have autocomplete here, okay? And that's the power of TypeScript, by the way. So let's run this in Ripple. And now I have my button, and when I click my button, of course, it goes green. But that's really not what I'm interested in, but I want to show you the capabilities of debugging, right? So let me put a breakpoint in my app, and let me just do it again. Yo, dude, I think I have to start it again. Okay. Perfect, right? So here's me in debugging. And of course I hit F10, and then I can take a look at everything that the button has and so forth and so forth. So this is JavaScript debugging with all the debugging goodies and stuff that we have with Visual Studio. So again, that's pretty important. The other one is something that is very similar to what you have with the browser-based developer tools. But now you have them in your debug session. This is the DOM Explorer, okay? This is something that we have in the browsers when we activate the developer tools, but now we have them incorporated into our debugging experience in Visual Studio. So this makes HTML, CSS, JavaScript-based development a whole lot easier and a whole lot more productive. So that's Cordova. Just an extra point, if you want to work with Cordova, then you have to know that you need to install it as an extra thing over Visual Studio 2013. So it's not available out of the box in Visual Studio. Yes? If you're already into Xamarin, you don't want to use Cordova, right? Yes? Yes, of course. Again, this is a matter of choice. You as a company or you as a developer have to decide which one are you most comfortable with, which one is most suited for your company, for the culture of your company, for the skill set that you have, right? In a situation where I am a company that has extensive knowledge in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I really don't want to learn C#. You don't need to use Visual Studio, okay? You can use any type of development environment. There are tons of development environments that support Apache Cordova, right? What I'm showing here is the support in Visual Studio. Not all of them offer everything that Visual Studio offers, to be very honest and open about it, right? Visual Studio already has some advantages like the debugging experience, support for TypeScript, by the way, and so forth, right? Yes, please. Oh, yeah. And by the way, there's also an interesting announcement about the SKUs of Visual Studio in 2015. And I will just tell you this, you'll have a very pleasant surprise. Okay? You'll have a very pleasant surprise. Yes, please. Sorry? The entire tool set that we have here is still in development. It's not released yet. Yeah. It's as far as I know, it's gonna RTM pretty much in the same time frame as the tooling for Visual Studio will be, and that's beginning of next year. Okay, good. So we still have 11 minutes left, out of which I want to use about 5 minutes for questions, so let's talk about Xamarin. Xamarin is C#, of course. It's the mono .NET framework, but actually it's going to be .NET framework, as I mentioned. And the compiler here, that's the interesting part, will produce native stuff. It will be fully native for iOS, or an integrated .NET app and runtime, which is the way that Java works, on Android. Plus you have the IDE tools, which can either be Xamarin Studio, Windows and Mac, or Visual Studio, which runs only on Windows. Here's the interesting part about the compilation process. And that's what's really cool about the Xamarin technology. You write C#, but what you get is native apps. When it comes to iOS, this is an AOT compilation to ARM assembly language. So it's really, really native. I've heard folks, even blogs, high-profile blogs, saying that, you know, Xamarin is not really, really, really native. Well, if someone can tell me what's really more native than AOT ARM code, which is actually what iOS uses, right, then I rest my case. But it is native. For Android, this is compiled to IL, to intermediate language, and it is packaged with mono VM, and there's jitting involved. It's exactly the same way the Java engine works, right? So this is what happens on Android. Of course, on Windows Phone, there's nothing to do. It's already native over there. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So I have two interesting things here. Let me first fire up my kitty cat, and that's the stuff that I like, right? When you do mobile development on your machine, you get into all sorts of weird situations. This is the one. If I want to run the Windows Phone emulator, Yeah, that's sort of known. It will crash, and then I will start it again, and it will work. It's not released yet, by the way. It's still oh. Now I've got a even better one, right? No, not really, because that's what I want to show, actually. It's the pleasure of doing development on your machine. The Android emulator, the one that we use from Xamarin, complains about Hyper-V being activated, right? But I can't run the Windows Phone emulator without Hyper-V being activated. So what I do is actually I just ignore that, okay? Now, that's why I mentioned that I was so thrilled last night when I've heard that we're gonna have a native Visual Studio Android emulator, right? Which is actually gonna be built on top of Hyper-V. So that's going to improve significantly our development experience. So my Android emulator started, and by the way, the Xamarin emulator is way better than the Google one. If you do Android development, just try it, okay? From starting times up to performance, up to integration with the graphic card, it's way better. Now, let me just stop the previous one, and let me show you cross-platform development. And what I'm actually going to show you here is not UI, but is something that I'm so happy to announce that we will release as an open source project, and we will also publish on NuGet. It's something that we've been working for the past 12 months, is a cross-platform Xamarin-based mini implementation of Entity Framework over SQLite. That's intended for development of line of business applications that need to have complex relational databases running on the mobile devices. So I'm not going to enter into the details. We'll make the announcement probably in a couple of weeks. We're gonna publish it on GitHub, and we're gonna publish it as a NuGet package. But what I've prepared here is just a set of tests, right? And here's just a basic unit test for Android, which is actually using all this stuff. The simple unit test does nothing more than it sets up the repository. And oh yeah, by the way, this is a cross-platform native SQLite-based repository, which also happens to have synchronization capabilities if you want to synchronize your data with the central server. That's just a little bit on top of it. But what we have here is the test, which actually it uses the factory pattern and dependency injection, so it's really written in a decent way. And what it does is actually just takes a list of entity 01 and fills it in a list. So it's nothing spectacular. It's just a demo test. But it runs on Android, it runs on iOS, it runs on Windows, and it runs on Windows Phone. And actually, what we're using here, as you can see, are let me just make it here, are the cross-platform implementations for the database engine. You know, SQLite is a cross-platform engine, but is not packaged as a pickle. It's platform dependent. So if you want to use SQLite on Windows Phone, you have to use the SQLite version for Windows Phone. If you want to use SQLite for iOS, you need to use the SQLite version for iOS, right? So it's not, it's, yes, please. Yes, but that's only runs on top of SQLite, okay? Actually, the stuff that I'm showing to you here is built on top of SQLite Net. SQLite Net is the C#, is the pickle that runs on top of it, but unfortunately SQLite Net is not an implementation of an iQuery provider for Link, okay? And it has some significant drawbacks, like no support for joins. And that's the big one if you want to do complex operations, right? But the focus here, of course, is that we're really running cross-platform using the Xamarin technology. So let's just do this. I will make this the startup project, and I'm just going to start it on my KitKat. Needs to be deployed. So what is keeping you from deploying it? Let me just clean. Okay. It's going to take a little while because... Okay, so let me start it. Did somebody change my... Okay. That's much better. Now we're talking. Okay, so this is the classical unit testing approach for Android. It actually uses NUnit Lite, which is the approach that Xamarin uses. Just a moment. There was a question? Oh, no. Somebody was doing like this. And I said, just a moment, I'm gonna answer all the questions. So here's the unit test loaded in Android, so I'm gonna run it. So what, and there's one test that has been passed. So what happens behind the scenes here, there's actually a whole lot going on. There's a SQLite database being created. Its structure is automatically created. It is filled with some test data, and then it is instantiated, and there's a query running on top of it. And it's, of course, run on iOS and runs on Android. So I'm going to stop here my slides, and as I've promised, I'm going to continue now for the time that we have left with questions. Thank you very much. Don't forget about our prize, the Surface Pro 3. So let's get to a few questions. Yes, here? Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. No, of course. If you want to share logic between apps, and they are native apps, yes, pre-existing apps, at the moment, there's no, let me phrase it like this, there's no supported way to do it, okay? Yes, please. Yeah. Yes. Yes, they expose all the APIs of the operating systems into standard .NET namespaces. So with the simple using clause, you can use that stuff. Except, there is one caveat here. There's sometime a little bit of time that goes on before a new release of the OS and supporting Xamarin. So if there is a new cool thing that there is, let's say, in iOS 9, it might be that you need to wait a couple of weeks until you can actually use it in your Xamarin, because there's a natural gap between what's available and what's supported in their framework. Yeah? Any other questions? Yes, please. What do you mean by encryption? SQLite does not support encryption out of the box. Yeah. But you can do encryption. Nobody stops you. Oh, no. Yes, please. Yes. You can target 8 both for phone and for regular Windows. Yeah, but there are some things that won't be available there, which are only in Windows 8.1. But of course, yeah. Yeah, there was somebody else there. Yes, please. Cordova is an HTML app, and the way it's deployed, it is deployed on all platforms in a web frame. So there's a native app that only contains a web frame, and your HTML code runs and uses the native operating system, JavaScript engine, and so forth. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, you will have different apps for iOS, for Android, and so forth. That's when you package the apps, you get different apps, of course, for every store. Yeah. I'll take one last question. Yes, please.
I received from a client a request to do a cross-platform project using Qt with C++, if you know the framework.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I did a little research, and I didn't want to continue because I saw that some technologies weren't supported on all platforms. Would you advise using Qt?
That's a tough question. I can't say yes or no because I don't know the details, but any given time, my first two major options are either Cordova or Xamarin.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody very much. I hope you have a nice conference. Thank you.